Have you ever witnessed someone say, "If you don't like it, leave," and everyone leaves? What was the story? A former industrial job I used to have said that during an all-hands meeting, we were understaffed, underpaid, and overworked, and everyone knew it. Instead of the 2:1 ratio of 2 machines to 1 operator for safety reasons, we'd have 4, 6, 8, because people were getting paid less than most retail jobs to bust their ass in some of the most disgusting work I've ever done. You'd come home covered in moldy coolant, metal shavings, and stink. Machines started breaking down because they'd never shut them down to perform maintenance on them, so we'd often have massive problems, which, of course, meant even more overtime to make up for the broken machines, and people started quitting. Management's response was to tell us that they expected us to work harder because they couldn't get more help in. One of my coworkers, who generally gave no facts, asked, in front of everyone in that room, why they didn't try raising the poor wages and see if they could entice people that way. The response was, "We're not having that conversation right now. If you don't like it, you can quit." Who, buddy, was that the wrong thing to say? As soon as word got out to the other shifts, what can only be called a faking exodus began. We lost half of each shift within the week. I stuck around for a few more weeks until I had a conflict with my schooling at the time, since one of my classes got out about 30 minutes before my shift, 30 minutes away. So I warned them in advance that I might be a few minutes late one day a week, maybe, and got told that I needed to decide what was more important, my school or my job. So I quit and giggled my ass off at the sign in the human resources office that said we had an almost 80% turnover rate. Never did find out what happened to that hellhole, but I can't imagine anything good with losing that many people. The poor human resources rep seemed like she was just so faking done with everything and seemed so very apologetic as she took my badge. Not exactly, but my sister had a habit of picking fights with people, and when it wasn't going her way, she'd tell them she was removing them from her life. She's done it to boyfriends, longtime friends, sorority sisters. She did it to me twice. The first time, I rolled my eyes because she's younger than me. After the second time, my sister told me, "I'm removing you from my life, you're toxic," and unfriended me and told family I was toxic. In reality, I wasn't letting her be toxic, selfish, and under the influence of whatever she was on with / me, my spouse, or my kids. So she decided it was a good idea to threaten us. I said okay, fine. Per her usual routine, after a few weeks she came around and wanted to pretend she never said the things she said I didn't respond to. She claimed it all was a joke and she had a right to be in my kids' lives. I haven't spoken to her in 2 years. I honestly do not miss her drama, and it was the best decision for my family. It highlighted how bad the generational dysfunction was in my family and how it was expected to just overlook bad behavior and people please for everyone else's comfort. I realized that I didn't want my kids to repeat that cycle. I vowed to always put my kids first. I'm not popular in my family right now, but I've never been happier, and this was the first year I got to enjoy holidays without having panic attacks or dread. When someone walks out of your life, let them. My aunt's 40th birthday. It had been a long day and we were set to eat dinner, but she decided that she wanted to open gifts. My mom tried to explain that everyone was hungry and to just wait until we were done eating, or at the very least until everyone had a plate. She starts getting pissy and saying that it's her day and that if we don't like it we can leave. Now my dad, not too fond of my aunt for reasons I won't get into here, gets up and walks out. Well, this started a chain reaction. The only people left were my mother and grandmother. My aunt starts yelling and getting upset, to which my grandmother replies, "Maybe don't be a bitch. It's been 10 years and she has never acted that way again." Edit. Okay, for all you assholes hitting me up about my grandmother, she is a great woman. She raised her right. This behavior stems from her first and only marriage, where her husband let her do and act however she wanted. This party happened a year after her divorce, fact's sake. Final edit. I want to be pissed at a lot of you sheets for coming for my grandmother's name, but there are so many others that understand the roast. Thanks y'all. I was gonna delete this comment, but it will stay for the sake of the thread. As for the votes and awards, thank you as always. We got a good space. Happy New Year. I worked at PetSmart and had a shift manager that was an absolute nightmare to work with. She complained and cried that no one worked while being on her phone all shift. This particular day I had come to work at 3 AM after working 15 hours a day prior to help cover. I was immediately met with "you look like shit. The military didn't teach you how to act at work or something." I let it slip because at the time I needed an extra income and carried on with my work. This day the truck we had was about 12 pallets of dog items from food to beds etc. Well, instead of helping me, she stayed in the middle aisle arguing with her boyfriend on the phone. The guy came in like 30 minutes later and they kept arguing over some random nonsense. I went up to her to see if she was going to help and was met with "I will help when I feel like it will go back and finish or you won't have a job tomorrow." So I laughed in her face and politely said good luck finishing the truck. I walked out while she screamed at me about not using them as a reference and to give them my shirt back blah blah blah. Honestly, one of the best decisions I made for myself in a while. Yes, or pretty close to it at least. I was a founding member and treasurer of a skydiving society at my university in Aberystwyth. I myself am teetotal, but I still went out on the weekly social nights which, in Aberystwyth, were just spent in the local bars and pubs as there is nothing else to do there at night. I'm pleased to say that my owning a car, so giving people lifts to the drop zone, plus my being teetotal, designated driver/nanny on nights out, plus my house being close to the nearest drop zone, 4 hours away, just south of Birmingham, and letting the club sleep there on occasion, had made me rather well liked. We went to one of our usual favorite haunts, Lord Beeching's, only this time the owner was there behind the bar, with one other staff member who looked rather glum, serving and was in a foul mood. All 25 or so of us went in and ordered drinks. He served 23 of us, then eyed my friend, even though he was clearly over 18, a student, with 24 other students, a regular, the other staff member vouched for him etc. Made him walk back to halls to get his passport before he would serve him. This was already eliciting grumbles from the club, but everyone accepted pubs had to be careful about restrictions and carried on. Then I asked for a glass of water, which he was legally required to provide, I might add. He replied, "I'm not muddying my glasses for some prick who isn't paying." I simply raised my eyebrows, as I had never encountered such a response to a request for a glass of water before. After a moment for it to set in that this guy wasn't making a weird joke, he really wasn't going to give me a glass of water, I turned around to the room of 24 other people. I swirled my finger in the air and shouted, "Skydiving club, drink up. This asshole won't serve me, so we are leaving." Everybody drank up immediately, and we all left. The skydiving club never went there again whilst I was a member, and everyone else I told the story to avoided it as well. It was a typical 80s teenage house party. I don't even remember how we ended up at this guy's house, but I only knew him by name at school, and we had never hung out before. There was a pony keg, and about 15 people there, so far so good. I remember someone asking the guy if he had any music. The dude shrugged it off and said maybe later. First we have to get in the right mindset. He left the room and came back with a Crown Royal bag. Everyone was thinking he was about to twist up a joint. Cool with us. He then pulls out a huge bag of cocaine and starts lining it up in front of us without saying a word. Now, I was okay with a little weed and I wouldn't care if someone was doing coke in the back room discreetly, but I never did it myself, and was definitely not cool with someone having such a large amount in the open. I politely said, "Hey man, that's more of a backroom thing." A couple of others around me said something similar and the whole vibe changed. The guy noticed everyone was uncomfortable, but nevertheless said, "It's my house. If you don't like it you can leave." I'll never forget how quietly and orderly everyone proceeded to leave. I would guess there must have only been 2 or 3 people left. It was awesome. A teacher nobody liked pulled the old, "If you don't want to behave, you can leave my classroom" on a classmate. The whole class got up and left. Things hadn't been going well in this class since he had started teaching us. The main problem was that he was a really bad teacher, like, he seemed to have no knowledge on his own subject, history, or at least was incredibly bad at transferring his knowledge. We didn't have any respect for him, and he tried to keep us in line by being extremely strict, but in an unfair way. Wouldn't let anyone ask questions anymore, because he could never answer them, screamed at students if they quietly asked their neighbor for a pencil, that sort of stuff. I don't remember what my classmate did that angered the teacher, but it was something minor. We were all fed up with him. So when he told my classmate to just leave, we all did. Felt really rebellious, and like I was part of a bigger plan or something. It was great. We got into trouble for it, but also got the teacher fired, so it was worth it. Grade 8 language arts class. To preface this, I was never an aggressive student, generally the teacher's pet, the person who, if a teacher was away for the day, would be tasked in their notes to the sub, to be able to assist and give them directions. The time. 20 some odd years ago, shortly after the Columbine shooting. This context is critical to the story. Location, middle of nowhere Alberta, a small country school. So our regular teacher was out for the day and had left a note directing the sub to ask me if she had questions about what had been covered. Sub comes in, reads a note, and opens the teacher's weekly planner. Then begins writing our words for the weekly spelling test on the board, except she opened the wrong week. Instead of the current week, she had opened the prior week. At this point, being the goody two shoes that I was, and much to my classmates' dismay, although our teacher would have corrected us when she was back, so it wouldn't have helped them, I raised my hand and politely informed her that I believed she had gotten the page wrong as we had previously covered this material. What happened next, I couldn't make up. She lost her crap. She started ranting about how teens in general and me specifically were a danger to her, how she didn't know who her friends and her enemies were in the class, we'd never had this sub before, how she had every right to fear for her life. She then capped it off by saying she was the teacher, and if we wanted to think in her classroom, well, there was the door, we were welcome to leave. I was never a popular child, so I wasn't really expecting one of the popular kids, and my sometimes bully, to stand up collectively with everyone else, pull me to my feet, and we all walked out. Now, I mentioned above that we attended a small country school. There was no place to go, so we just sat in the hallway until the principal came down to chew us out for not being in class. The sub was gone by the start of the next period, and the principal taught the rest of our teachers' classes that day. My husband worked at a really toxic job for a while. As staff got fired or quit, they weren't replaced to cut costs, and instead the remaining 2 employees were worked to death. Finally, the owner, who was a shitty boss and terrible businessman, called a meeting with the 2 to try to force an attitude adjustment. The employees tried to be constructive and talk about things they saw that needed to be improved upon to make things work better, and of course this egotistical asshole owner wouldn't have it, and he told them if they couldn't handle the expectations that they were free to leave. So they did. Both of them left immediately and never set foot in the store again. I don't think the owner was expecting that at all. He expected them to grovel and beg to keep their jobs and thank him for the opportunity to work 70-hour weeks under his tyrannical rule. My husband called me after that meeting and was so upset he couldn't hardly tell me what happened. He was terrified. He was so sure I would be angry at him for quitting his job when we really weren't in a position that I could support us. I wasn't mad at all. I was so proud of him for not taking the sheet that was being doled out to him and doing what is best for his mental health. He's a damn good man and deserved better. Every year the military has this event they host named the Warrior Games. It's like the Olympics for men and women who were injured while serving. I'm a decent cyclist, so I was selected to represent the Marine Corps team in that event. I'm not sure where they hold the event these days, but the year I was selected they flew us out to Colorado Springs. When I got there I quickly realized that 99% of the Marines competing were still active duty. I had retired a few years prior, so it was weird being around Marines again. Almost immediately after arriving, the senior leaders and officers in charge began demanding that I get my hair cut and to shave my beard. At first I laughed it off and thought they were joking. Turns out they were quite serious. The lady who was in charge of the marine team was a major, and she took me off to the side and ordered me to get a haircut. I reminded her that I had retired a few years prior and was no longer required to abide by active military grooming standards. Then a light bulb went off in her head, and with a smirk she said, "Well, you either get a haircut or you can go home. Your choice." So I smirked back and said, "Guess I'm flying home." They had already pre-purchased our airline tickets home, so all I did was call Delta, explain what happened, and the lady on the other end transferred my ticket to a flight home the next day. I had taken a few weeks off work to attend this event, so I just went back home and enjoyed my time off with my hair and beard. I work for a hoisting/transport contracting company at a large refinery, and for the most part it's very relaxed. Basically it's more cost effective to have more than enough people just in case something goes wrong, so a lot of the time we just sit around waiting for something to do. My foreman for some reason doesn't like this and thinks we all have it too easy, even though he is totally redundant and literally not needed at all here, and was telling one of the guys one day that maybe he needs to go to the yard, our HQ/main office we are dispatched from and all our equipment is stored, and see what a real job is like. So he did. He called the office and transferred there permanently, and our foreman on site lost his faking mind. He didn't even say anything about it for weeks, but we all knew what happened. One day I even asked if the guy that left was on vacation or something. He just mumbled, "Yeah, something like that." Had my first job as a massage therapist. My friend from school also got a job there. The business was taken over by this lady who decided to also hire her friend, who hadn't even graduated massage therapy school. The owner's friend would start sessions way earlier than necessary if the clients got there early, which meant that sometimes my friend and I would sometimes have to scramble to get ready for couples massages with her. For example, my friend was still commuting and was a few minutes away, and the owner's friend tried to start having the clients get ready. It was frustrating because we'd have no time to talk to the clients before the sessions like we were supposed to. One day I politely told her that my friend wasn't there yet and she should wait to put the clients on the table until he was actually there so he could talk to his client. She got super mad and told the new owner I was being rude to her. Well, the new owner clearly got a different story and started texting me telling me I was in trouble. I didn't ever find out what the actual issue was directly from her, but I knew it was because of her friend, because of how quickly it happened after I told her friend to wait to start that session. I tried to set up a meeting in person to talk about it, but she kept refusing and said we could talk about it over text. I decided I wasn't going to deal with that unprofessional behavior from a manager and walked in to tell her I quit. Turns out my friend also quit that day because of her friend's nonsense. The business owner was left with her unlicensed/uncertified friend and a stand-in that was extremely unreliable on a really full schedule. It wasn't everyone, because it only applied to me, but I was working at a fast food restaurant in high school when we got a new manager who tried to be a hard ass and enforce every rule to the letter of the law. Most of these rules were irrelevant and had been ignored by all previous managers, so he caught out a lot of people who had been there for years and didn't even know what they were doing was technically against the rules. I got in trouble because I pulled out my phone to read a text from my mom. This was 2004. At the time my mom would never texted unless it was important, and technically using your phone on the line was against the rules. I thought he just wanted to look at what kind of phone I had because he said, "Hey, can I see that?" But after he got it, he locked it in the office and told me I couldn't have it until the end of my shift. I told him he had to give me my property back immediately, and he said, "If you don't like it you can quit." So I did. A few folks tried to talk him down, but he was steadfast and refused. I found out later that every other manager told him he was a faking idiot. He didn't last long. Fun bonus, my mom's phone had gotten a virus and the text it sent me and everyone else in her phone book was a picture of a gummy bear with a business. Many moons ago, when I was 13 or 14, I was pretty active in the Boy Scouts. I had come up through Cub Scouts, and it was a great way for me to spend time with my dad and friends, learn new skills, and overall, experience life. My dad had always been involved in some form or fashion throughout these years in Cub Scouts as an assistant scout master or even just as a helpful parent. It was nice. He just wanted to be involved and spend time having fun with me, his only son. In case you're unaware, when going from Cub Scouts, younger scout groups called packs and ends, to Boy Scouts, older scout groups called troops, you generally, at least in our local area, change groups completely, meeting location, etc. The local Boy Scout troop we joined after Cub Scouts seemed warm and welcoming at first. After the first year, it became apparent there was a lot of infighting between assistant scout masters and parents over activities and outings, and not enough top-down leadership from the troop's head scout master. This filtered down many times to the scouts themselves, creating cliques within the troop. The fun was over. My dad did a quiet Homer Simpson melting into the bushes meme and resigned. Even then, he was still very supportive of my involvement in the scouts, but he didn't want to be a part of it any longer. 6 to 8 months later, I'm working towards one of the many achievements in Boy Scouts, along with many of the other scouts. So the assistant scout masters start assigning higher ranking scouts to lower ranking scouts to advise and lead us towards this achievement. And I got assigned to one of the holier than thou scouts whose father was one of the worst offenders. So the scout starts assigning a pretty aggressive schedule of goals to complete by a certain date, none of which was really achievable, especially with all of my activities, school, martial arts, motorsports, scuba diving. I was a fairly active teen. I pushed back with suggestions on what I could actually accomplish within a reasonable amount of time. He wasn't having any of it. Finally, he makes the abrasive comment, "You're going to have to get your priorities straight." To which I look straight, deadpan at him and respond, "You know, you are absolutely right." No emotion and no judgment in my statement. I closed my scouting book, packed my stuff into my bag, got up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the building with him still sitting there wondering what just happened and how to respond. Waited outside for the rest of the scout meeting for my parents to pick me up. 3 or 4 of my friends dropped out within a month as well, which I had nothing to do with. I learned a great life lesson that day that has served me well, especially throughout high school. Learn to spot toxic people and toxic situations and avoid them. You'll be a much happier and relaxed person. A math class in high school. All the math teachers were pretty chill. They knew the majority of kids hated math, so they'd try to make it "fun," wouldn't be as strict as other teachers, and would treat us like adults, happy to just chat about any old thing, as long as we tried our best and did the work. One day we had a student teacher come in and teach the class as part of her studies. Up until that point she'd been observing for a couple weeks. She wasn't bad, and she tried to emulate the other teachers, and as an assistant teacher she was good. Well, when it was her turn to teach alone, it all went to shit. She constantly lost the attention of everyone, and was generally being hard as and not really helping people who didn't understand. Halfway through she flipped, didn't like that she couldn't control the class and just shouted at us all saying, "If you don't like it then you don't have to be here." So there we were. It was a few seconds of us all thinking, wait, did she just tell us we could leave? Then everyone got up and left. Our regular teacher was sitting at the side observing. He just looked exasperated and didn't stop anyone. Just told us all to have a good day and he'd see us next week. I don't remember ever seeing the student teacher again. Okay, maybe not everyone left, but my mother-in-law got me involved in a charity. First I was a volunteer, then a secretary to the board and back to volunteer again. Things started changing. People who got on the board were no longer true to the organization's mission, and at times ethically challenged, that is using high school volunteers for the charity in a political campaign, using artwork obtained through contest beyond scope of the contest rules without pay. Anyway, during one of the meetings, which was meant to be planning for a big annual event, but was more like hazing to be honest, I asked myself, why the hell am I allowing anyone to treat me like a whipping girl? So I openly asked the board members if this tone is the new standard of the organization's interactions with people volunteering their time and talent to them. The president told me I was being impertinent and rude, and if I could not stand the heat, to get out of the kitchen. To which I replied that I quit volunteering. He told me then I had to submit my resignation in writing in order for it to be acceptable. I sat down, scribbled my resignation on a notebook page, and presented him with it. He told me he won't accept it because it was not submitted according to the bylaws. I told him he was incorrect and reminded him I wrote the bylaws. They were too cheap to hire a lawyer to write them, and they clearly state that volunteer resignations do not require board approval. And I left. I was too pissed to drive home, so I went to a cafe across the street. Few minutes later 2 other long-time volunteers and all the high school volunteers walked in. They all did quit effectively immediately as well. The annual event did not take place. The board was sued by the entity it was supposed to be solely supporting for mismanagement and misappropriation of funds. The charity later involuntarily dissolved by the state due to reporting failures. Custodian was appointed who allocated the remaining funds. In hindsight, it was the right time to jump the ship. For me the best part was, the board let the insurance lapse. Guess who normally kept track of the renewals? So the legal expenses and part of the judgment went out of their own pockets. Talk about heat in the kitchen. I used to be the co-owner and station manager for a small online radio station. We were all digital, so I rarely met any of our staff in person, and we were online 24/7, so if I was awake I was pretty much always working. We had a dedicated team of assistant station managers, about 6 of them, in charge of various things, and we would have once weekly meetings with me, the ASMs, and the other co-owner. None of us were paid. This was strictly a volunteer gig. It cost the co-owner and I money to keep the station on the air, but it was a labor of love. At one point I began to get close to one of the ASMs, and we started dating. The co-owner of the station got jealous and began to give him shit about his work, demanding that he redo graphics and coding over and over and over, even when it was perfectly fine. He laid into the ASM at one of our weekly staff meetings, and I lost it. I told him that he needed to stop his behavior, or I was going to walk. Fine, he said. This is my station. If you don't like the way I run it, leave. I quit on the spot. So did half of the assistant station managers. Then a large number of the DJs. Within 2 years, the whole thing had to shut down because no one could work with my former co-owner because he was a petty tyrant who had to have things his way and couldn't let people live their lives. I've never felt such petty glee as when I saw their off-the-air blog post. Late 90s framing / building a multi-million-dollar sign house. The 5 of us farmers hadn't been paid in 3 weeks, and the boss promised that with the last payment from the builder we would all get paid. But little did he know all of the bill collectors were showing up at the job looking for him, so we knew there would be no money left for us. The guys on my crew were the sort you don't cross. They were actually talking about dragging him out in the woods and shooting him. So I confronted him about the money and the fact that I knew about all of the people he promised money to. He basically told me to pound sand, that if I didn't like it, leave. Well, I wasn't going without my back pay, so I talked to the builder that night. Promised him we would stay and finish the house. Another few days of work if he promised to pay the last draft in cash with us present. He agreed. The end of the week rolls around and we finish up. The boss shows up to collect the final payment for the job at the job trailer. When he walks in we are all sitting there. He turned white as a ghost. The builder hands him an envelope full of cash and excuses himself. I asked for our pay and the pay of all the guys and had all the numbers written down for him. The big guy on the crew had already positioned himself between the boss and the door. He paid every last cent he owed us and walked out with a couple $100 left. He had no more money coming in, so I have no idea what happened to him after that. As we were leaving the trailer, the big guy thanked me for getting his money as he pulled up his shirt to show me his .44 Magnum. I almost shit my pants knowing what could have gone down. Haven't seen any of these guys or the boss since that night. I don't know if this counts, but this happened with my siblings and I, and my mom. She was a terrible parent, not abusive enough to get child services fully involved, but they had visited the house a few times. Wonder how much abuse kids have to endure before they get off their ass, but apparently being rapped by your stepdad isn't a cause for alarm. She always had a, if you don't like living here, move out attitude. So, as soon as my siblings and I were able to, yeah, we moved out. We unfortunately don't get along at all. One of us became a perpetrator in the abuse. Another stuck too close to home for me to risk further contact. But the eldest of us left in their early 20s. The middle child left about as soon as they graduated, moved back for a few months but left again. And I moved several states away and never looked back. We all didn't like it and left. And yes, our mom frequently tries asking why. She asks the middle child the most as she's the only one who keeps contact with our mom. I've cut her off years ago, as did the eldest. As if 18 years of abuse isn't a good enough reason to say fuck it and dip. From 1996 to 1999 I worked for Burger King. It was my first job and I stayed because they were close to home. My friends worked there and they were very accommodating for my buddy's school and then university schedule. At one point they fired our favorite manager, Kevin. We were never really told why. He was just gone one day. They replaced him with a complete turd of a human. The turd started forcing us to sell food that the policy said was too old to sell. He cut down on ketchup portions for carry-out fries. He started short-staffing us, so things weren't getting cleaned correctly. Scheduled students when they had class. Just a general jerk who didn't know what he was doing. Burger King didn't realize Kevin had an entire well-oiled crew who was loyal to him. They told us to deal with the new manager instead of trying to fix his issues. So we left. All of us. The entire crew saved a few nights shift closers who had to have a job walking distance from their apartments. Kevin became the store manager of a newly opened pizza place and needed to hire a whole crew. Good news for him is he didn't have any trouble finding one that won what they were doing and worked well together. So that was the day I went from Burger Maiden to Pizza Princess. Stayed there 3 years too, until I got through college. My first FC in FF14. Basically what this game calls a guild. One of my best friends in the FC left because they were the only active officer. The FC leader wasn't doing squat. The other active officers left for unrelated reasons, and my friend was going through a really awful family crisis that left them unable to be the only active officer of a decent sized FC. So they left and joined a much smaller FC founded by some other ex-members of our FC who left before my friend. Or I had joined this one. The FC leader suddenly becomes active again, and she spends days bad-mouthing and slandering my friend and their new FC in Discord. Just an endless stream of lies and hate. At this point, I start BMing my other friends in the FC, letting them know I'm leaving as soon as I get my affairs in order, and sharing my friend's side of the story. 2 days before I intended to pull the trigger, 2 people in Discord ask the FC leader for receipts. Not even in a nasty way, just asking the leader for specifics. One of them gets kicked out right away, the other gets berated for several minutes, and then kicked out. And the leader tells us that anyone who would cast any doubt on anything she has to say isn't welcome here anymore. So almost every member who witnessed that chat walks out. In my case, I was at work when this all went down, so I couldn't go into the game to remove myself. So I told her I quit, and she kicks me out right away. Sadly there are a bunch of people who didn't get to see it. The leader blanked Discord a few minutes after this all went down, so a bunch of people never saw it and have no idea what happened, and some of them are still there. And for what it's worth, me and a handful of others end up going to the FC my friend joined. It's a pretty chill place. Turns out the leader of my old FC has a long history of abusive meltdowns that result in mass walkouts. The new FC was founded as a result of the one before this. If you play FF14, stay the fuck away from the Forest Owls. Most toxic FC leadership on Marlborough. Edit. Oh yeah. So a few days after the walkout I ran into one of the inactive officers on Facebook, and we had a little chat. She was planning on getting back into the game in a few days when the new patch was scheduled to come out, and after telling her what went down, she also decided to walk. In retaliation, the FC leader stalked her with alts for weeks. Every time she would go anywhere, there would be some creepy lalafel with a name from the FC leader's native language following her around. She ended up having to change servers to get away from her. My roomie works at a grocery chain that rhymes with Playfday. He has run into a common issue with middle managers in grocery. Once they make a decision they never go back on it, because that would be showing weakness. He was transferred to his current location because one of his coworkers physically assaulted him. The guy, let's call him Rob, has a long history of this sort of behavior, and every time it happens they just transfer him to a new store or transfer his victim of the week out. They generally don't tell the new store's manager why they did this. So it was announced that Rob was getting transferred to my roomie's store. Roomie has been with the chain for, 15 years or so. He's a lifer, full-time night crew. They leave him alone, and he does the work of 3 people. Roomie and some other people familiar with Rob go to management, explaining why this is unacceptable. Management basically tells them to bad. The transfer is filed. They told the roomie he could work days if it was a problem. Change his schedule with a 12-hour shift after 15 years of being nocturnal. No big deal. It turns out you can take vacation pay and even claim benefits if you go on stress leave due to a hostile/unsafe work environment. Roomie, a cashier who was getting moved to give Rob a slot, and amusingly Rob himself all went on stress leave. Roomie even lawyered up since the union wasn't doing shit for him, even though the management was breaking clear rules in their agreement with how they were scheduling. Anyway, eventually they caved and reversed the transfers, and now that manager is getting, you guessed it, transferred to another store. I have a few. A couple that immediately came to mind. I was in college and on the cheer squad. I was working retail part-time. I asked my boss to work around my cheer schedule. He refused because cheerleading is not a sport. He was working around other employee extracurriculars. He said if I didn't like it, leave. I said okay. He backpedaled so fast, kept the job, and was able to cheer. Another job. I was up for a big promotion. I was told it was mine. At the last minute, my boss gave it to the woman who worked under me because the boss heard a rumor I might be moving within the next year. Boss didn't talk to me or question the validity of the rumor. It wasn't true. Went to the boss office, and she was a complete witch about it. She said, if you don't like it, leave. So, I did. Right then. I can still see the look on her face. It left my team in a bind. She was not expecting me to just walk out right there and then. Found out later that the person who got the promotion wasn't working out, and that several of our clients who I'd established relationships with jumped ship because they didn't like the other person. When I was in high school, a group of friends agreed to meet at a local pizza place after a Friday evening basketball game. Most of the group arrived before me and 3 of my friends, so when the 4 of us arrived, the hostess and server did not realize we were a part of the large group that was already filling the restaurant. The students from our school represented about 75% of their now very full dining area. We were seated at the one available table in the middle of the room, received our menus, and were in the process of preparing our order when my best friend asked the waitress for a napkin. She returned a moment later, gave him the napkins, and he responded with a friendly thank you. I don't know if she misheard him or what, but she immediately became angry and responded with a very harsh, "Stop giving me that attitude." We were all taken aback, and I immediately stepped in to defend my friend, who was a naturally shy and quiet person. I explained he only told her thanks and did not have an attitude at all. She yelled at me, insisting that he was rude, and stormed away. The entire table had a moment of awkward silence, and then burst into laughter, along with several tables around us that had heard the exchange. It was all just so surreal. She literally got upset at our friend because he thanked her for bringing him a napkin. But we quickly went back to preparing our order until the manager approached the table and said that she had been told we were giving one of her waitresses a hard time. I explained what happened, and as I did, the rest of the dining room went quiet as they had realized that something tense was taking place. Then the manager cut me off mid-sentence, told me that she dealt with disrespectful teens like us all the time and was sick of it. She then told us that we could take our business elsewhere. So I agreed, and our table stood up to leave. And, almost as one, 75% of the customers in their dining room on that Friday evening stood up and walked out with us. I will never forget the stunned look on that manager's face as she watched hundreds of dollars of sales leave with us. It was the last time I ate there, and that was a pity, because I loved their pizza. When I was in college, I worked at a retail store. I had been there for about a year, and the old manager took a job at a new store in a different market. District manager decided that an outside hire was the best call, since the other assistant manager and myself had literally been there the same amount of time. I was supposed to be a part-time assistant, and, let's call him W, would have the full-time assistant spot. I wasn't thrilled, but whatever, I understood the choice. New manager shows up. He's never worked a day in retail and/or management. Brags about how easy this is, because he worked at a tire recycling plant before this. We'll call him K. So K completely lied on his resume and interview. But it's a small retail store in a small market. The district really didn't care if we turned out a huge profit, more of a break even or close kinda mentality. W had a medical issue, came in with a DR's note, and couldn't work for like 2 weeks because of a surgery. Instead of shouldering the load, K tells me you're the new full-time assistant. I ask about a raise, since I'm going feet, crickets. I ask about benefits, crickets. I ask for the keys to the deposit drop box, crickets. So he starts scheduling me like 55 to 60 hour weeks, outside the holidays, 4 to 5 doubles a week, open to close. Really not making a ton of sense to me, but I'm just working, getting by, using the extra money to pay off my student loans while I'm in school. Summer ends, classes start, and the dude keeps making schedules that we have to adjust. Scheduling me to work during classes, which shouldn't have been hard to avoid. I literally had classes Tuesday and Thursday from 8 to 1 p and that's it. Don't schedule me then and we are fine. About 2 weeks before the holiday season, we are supposed to have annual reviews. K says he can't do it because he's only been here for 6 months. Tell me to call the district. So I call the district, and I'm told that my numbers are terrible, especially on days when K works. We get to the raise portion, and I'm offered a 2% raise. I'm making $12.50, working foot hours. I poke around and find out that the same role one town over is making $15.50. So I call back to the DM, push this topic again. He tells me for a part-time assistant, you're making good money. You need to stop beaching and do the damn job. So I tell him, I'm full-time. He says I'm not. Needless to say, I'm heated. So I go to K, ask if he still has me as part-time. He says yeah, that's what we agreed on. I'm working full-time hours and just getting shit on here. Side note, why numbers were so bad, at the end of the days we would work together, he'd go back in the system, review my largest transactions, biggest add-ons, etc. and code the transactions to the store act number, which then defaults to his act, since he was the highest ranking person to work that day. About a month later I went to go check my schedule. I was supposed to have a whole week off. We have a schedule for 2 weeks at a time. I'm going to be in finals week. K had scheduled me for 2 finals. The class had 1 section for each class. I couldn't just take the exam with another class. So he says sorry, but you can either work or quit. I can't be here. I'm going to Mexico with my wife for her company retreat. I said, well then the store will have to close for those hours. That's not my fault. I had requested off, and you chose to ignore it. He goes out on the sales floor in front of customers, calling me an entitled little beach, and says you should thank me for this job. You're never faking using that degree, just a bunch of shit like that. So I waited. The week came, and he didn't change the schedule. I told him, if he didn't change the schedule then tough shit. I wasn't coming in, and ruining my future for that. He still didn't change it, so I dropped my keys off with him Sunday night at close, told him to kiss my ass, walked out and got a lifetime ban from that specific location. I was born into the cult, that is the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses, JW. I was told from a young age that I was only permitted to live with my mother if I was a good and faithful JW. If I wasn't committed to the big J then I was out on my ass. I remember one large argument I had with my mother in the car when she suddenly pulled over and screamed at me to get out and never come back because I wasn't being a good enough little JW. I refused because I was a scared little child. Fast forward to my teen years, and she still made it clear that it was Jehovah's way or the highway. So I left. It was a faking massive drama. My mother called my older siblings and elders from the congregation, church group, and they all came over to try and talk me out of it. It was this huge ordeal, but I stuck to my guns and left that very night with a suitcase full of my stuff and my school backpack. I already had a little unit lined up and had already paid the security bond on it. I moved in with a friend from school who was also having some trouble at home. That was probably the biggest defining moment of my life so far. If I hadn't moved out then I'd still be a damn JW and would have a completely different life to the one I have and love now. JW suck. Girl Scouts. Our new troop leader in 2nd grade was incredibly sexist. She took over the camping trip planned by the previous leader and brought her 2 younger sons along. Instead of a campsite, we pitched tents in a gravel parking lot. Her boys needed an recreational vehicle to sleep in. You see, the fry-up we'd planned, purchased, and prepared in advance was thrown out. Her boys wanted pancakes, and so on. Her boys wanted to go rock climbing. That sounded pretty good. We hadn't prepared permission forms or safety gear for 21 girls, so we sat in the hot Texas sun in July while they climbed. We were not allowed to walk to fetch water, to drink without an escort, and they needed both adults to guide and belay 4 hours with no shade and no water. She cancelled every activity we'd planned in preference to her son's whims and then excluded us from it because girls don't like doing things like that. Protesting that maybe we did like catching tadpoles or whatever was met with a well, little girls shouldn't like things like that. It got worse from there. Finally the new leader said, if you don't like the way I lead, you can always leave. The next meeting saw that everyone but her daughter's best friend, and me had left the troop. My parents were certain I was making shit up until we arrived and no one else did. I didn't have a history of that, but they were so sure no camp out could really have gone so badly. I was a new expediter at a kitchen and the line cook staff I was calling tickets to had a chip on their shoulder about the new guy telling them what to do. We were weeded, and I was trying my best to get them to increase their output per the request of the owner who saw that they were attempting to make me look like a bad expediter. They would not and just kept leisurely cooking, sort of smiling at me. Owner came down and read them the riot act. Whole line of Mexicans walked out. Only people who remained were myself and one other white dude who was next to worthless if I'm honest. Owner just laughed as they walked past. He hopped on the line and we 3 did the work of 6 people. Wasn't pretty but it got done. They tried to argue after the shift that I was the reason service was slow. After the new cooks were hired and I trained them in properly, the kitchen was on average about 3 times faster. 50 minutes to 15 minutes maximum wait, and all of our consistency issues were cleared up. People actually cleaned instead of watching soccer on their phones when there were no tickets. Our ratings improved by 1 star in a year. I cut food costs by 15% and increased wages for my staff by at least $2 per hour, adjusted for inflation with a portion of the additional profit. Made various logistical improvements that made our work far less grueling, venting, a point C, staggered scheduling, etc., and the product far safer and better tasting. The kitchen manager came back a year later for some kind of victory lap to see how far we had fallen without him holding it together and got a real wake-up call. Asked for his job back and I offered him a position in the dish pit. Didn't need cooks. Needed dishwashers. I wasn't trying to insult him, he wouldn't go for it. My last job. I worked at a family-owned deli/market and the family that ran it rarely took pride in their staff. When they did take pride, it was because you were related or were family friends with the owner's family, which made us the staff not take pride in our work. Getting paid minimum wage, to be screamed at daily for things out of your control or for things that went wrong that you didn't do would take a toll on you quickly depending on the day. Anyways, sometime in fall of 2018, I worked there for 9 to 10 months in total. Things started to go south with staff and management because they were mad at us staff for not doing anything properly or not paying for food we ate on shift. The food part is totally fair to be mad over. So some of us fought back and said we don't do anything properly because you don't train us properly. Your communication skills are non-existent. You scream at us for anything and everything. Like what do you expect? So one day one of the owners flipped on everyone and said if you don't like it here, then quit. And 2 weeks later, I quit with a 1-week notice, and shortly after so did everyone else, and naturally the owners couldn't understand why all the staff was up and leaving. I was at a sports camp, and they brought in professional athletes, not coaches/trainers. One guest coach in particular felt it was their job to show us how much harder professionals trained than high school kids. We broke out into positional groups and began our training. After a few exercises, a few people quit. The guest coach's eyes lit up as this was clearly going to be his teaching moment. He asked if anybody else thought that training should be fun, or if it should be hard. Anybody who was here just for fun was invited to leave. One of the better athletes looked at him and said, "This isn't the Navy SEALs," and grabbed his kit bag to leave. As he started walking back to dorms, everyone just silently started grabbing their gear and left too. We got a little bit of an earful from our coach for being rude, but I think he also knew that we wouldn't be motivated by another lecture. The regular coaches made sure the rest of the camp had plenty of fun training exercises. Not literally, but still the same result came about simultaneously in my proudest and not proudest moment in my sophomore year of undergrad. I was taking Calc 2 for a general ed requirement, and unfortunately I got assigned to the single most difficult professor in the math department. He was an effective teacher, but only if you understood him the first time and jived with his teaching style. So that semester was hell for me. Well, we had one guy in my particular class, let's call him Morgan. Morgan was 20 minutes late to a 50-minute class almost every single day, and he was so disruptive too. Slamming the door, saying hi to the prof, asking questions about stuff the prof already went through in the first 20 minutes of class, trying to coax alternate explanations out of him by making vague statements which only made the prof confused and made the class even more confused. And in the lab component, Morgan always hogged the lab prof's time because he was the one guy who never bothered trying the lab on his own with co-calc before coming to the lab. The main prof of the course got a lot of flack over Morgan from the rest of us because of just how unbelievably rude and ignorant he was. Just about every single one of us had complained to the professor about Morgan. The straw that finally broke the camel's back was the day of our final exam. Prior to the exam, I had held a study group where I invited all the other classmates to come. Morgan was one of many who said they would be there and then ghosted me. Well, on the day of, Morgan was on time to class and would not shut the fuck up. As in, I sat at least 3 rows over from Morgan, and for the first hour and 10 minutes of a 2-hour final was repeating a sheet to himself like, "I should have studied. God damn it, I'm an idiot. Ugh, I'm so stupid." Finally, after noticing that half the class was just glaring at him from different parts of the room, I waved over the prof and whispered to him that he needed to intervene because I literally could not read one tiny question without being interrupted by Morgan. And I can usually handle some noise during tests, like the pencil scratching and the occasional shift or sniffle or cough. But Morgan was on a full-blown tirade of what he thought was whispering. And the prof merely shook his head and went back to his desk and did nothing. And I flew off the faking handle over it, went full Karen on Morgan, slammed my fist on my desk, screeched his name, told him me and my classmates could hear every word of his self-crucifixion about how he didn't believe he could pass, told him that if he was seriously going to do this, that we have a testing center where he could request a private testing room. And that I worked there and could show him how to get a damn appointment, and that if he seriously believed he couldn't faking do it like he's been saying this whole time, then to just fail and retake this course for the 3rd time with some faking dignity by quitting and letting the rest of us try to pass in peace. I may have also threatened to see him out the door personally, since our prof was too much a bussy to respect all the other students. The prof responded by telling me to turn in my test and leave. And when I got up, everyone except Morgan got up, turned their tests in, and walked out without saying another word. Interestingly though, because I was cut short, the final score should have kept me at a C for the class by quite a bit, but I got bumped up to a B after my meltdown. Upon checking with my other vocal classmates, they all got bumped up a full letter grade too. As one of my friends told this story, I said, B for beach fit. Still ripped the prof about respecting students' right to a quality testing environment in the course levels. I moved from my dream state and dream job back to my home state and took a job doing janitorial at a major hospital until I could get back in my career field. Very niche career. I found one of the other janitors sitting in a clean, empty patient's room drinking coffee and eating cookies. Huge sanitary violation. That's why we have a break room. I'll let her know it was inappropriate, and I was going to give her the benefit of the doubt before letting my boss know. She cussed up a storm in front of nurses and patients. She had a deep, raspy 2-pack a day for 40 years. I'll let my boss know. Immediately after talking to him, he got a call. The nurses told my boss it was a guy's voice. He knew it wasn't me and would be 100% out of character for me to do such a thing. Things ended with him disciplining us both. I spoke up and said that's totally insane, and I cleaned twice as many rooms as her on a bad day. He didn't care and told me, if you don't like it, McDonald's is hiring for $10 an hour. My jaw just about hit the floor. I said okay, and went back to my cleaning supplies, put my beeper on silent, made a cup of coffee, and enjoyed the view from the 9th floor lounge and job searched until the day was over. At the end of the day, I had already talked to a potential employer who hired me 2 days later and handed my boss my badge and beeper, told him go ahead and take me off the schedule. Want anything from McDonald's? He just sat there with a stunned look on his face for a few seconds before I turned around and left, trying not to laugh. Ended up taking care of the mentally disabled for a little over a year after that. Now I'm back in my career field and making over twice what I was when I was at the hospital job. I was working at a company and was stuck in a position with no upward mobility. I started applying to other jobs while my company was being purchased by a competitor. I saw a new opening due to the much larger company having purchased us. So, I applied for that job. I was offered that position, but since the two companies hadn't officially merged yet, my boss denied the move. We had a weird policy where your boss had to approve your move to another team/department. I complained to my boss and human resources and they both pretty much told me that if I don't like it, I can leave. And with perfect timing, I ended up getting an offer from another job the following day. I walked in that day to my current job and gave them my resignation. I put in my resignation letter that I wasn't giving 2 weeks notice since they said I could leave. I got a call a week later from the company that bought us to ask me about what happened. I told them. They removed that policy and were in the process of firing human resources since it was redundant. They said, even though I didn't give notice, that I would be welcome back there. The best part is, about 6 months later, my old boss applied to where I'm working, a small industry. My current boss sees that he worked where I worked and asks me if I want to sit in on the interview. Hell yeah, I did. Needless to say, my old boss knew he wasn't getting that job once he saw me, but he still finished the interview. I told my current boss what happened, and he said fuck that guy. Haha. Senior year I needed to take one last elective credit to graduate, so I took creative writing a second time because I loved it sophomore year when I took it at my previous school. It was pretty clear from the jump that our teacher was struggling. He admitted during the icebreaker on the first day that he was a recovering alcoholic and married to a man, to which a group of 6 sophomore boys exchanged looks and snickered. I knew then that this class would be difficult with them in it, as they found a way to quietly mock every single icebreaker fact the rest of the class shared, no matter how innocuous. I don't think we got more than 3 weeks into the class before they began poking the bear. Our teacher seemed tired by the end of the day usually, and they seemed to know just how to press his buttons. They had it down to a science by Halloween. Time went on and reprimands became swearing outbursts out of what was clearly more than just frustration at the boys. The final straw was a little after Thanksgiving break, when he just got furious and asked if they even wanted to be in class actually, if any of us wanted to be in class, if these guys were just here to laugh amongst themselves at everyone's hard work, because the bulk of the class really loved the thought-provoking assignments and took them seriously. Having been fed up with them myself, more than probably anyone else in the class, I led the charge and said honestly, no. They've taken a great class that was a nice creative release for me and made me dread coming. He asked me if I wanted to leave, and I said yes. He gave me permission to leave. I took that opportunity, and I don't think I got halfway down the hallway before my friend followed along with the rest of the class. I gave my friend a ride home in silence, and when we came back, class wasn't ever really the same. Everyone was uncomfortably quiet, class discussions became sparse, and when they did occur they were all pretty surface level, and the boys finally shut the fuck up. I finished feeling proud of my work, but I always wondered if I could have grown more in my writing had those boys not been in the class and we all could have felt truly comfortable sharing our writing and our progress. One of the boys did end up giving a genuine apology by the end of the semester. I used to work for a state Department of Health and Human Services in the SNAP department. The CEO was famously incompetent. She had already run the state system, which was top 10 in the country, into the ground to the point it ranked 52nd in the country. Yes, 52nd. There are 50 states. She would routinely bring in advisory firms to do a study on the state's SNAP system to figure out why it was so bad. Every study came back the same. Hey, you remember when you let go 30% of the workforce 5 years ago and didn't hire replacements? Maybe you shouldn't have done that. Now go hire more people. Every study was ignored. Tridge policies would be announced, some of which were very close to fraud, and we wouldn't bother learning them because we knew they would be replaced next week. At any given time the state legislature was performing at least one investigation on her. One day we were called to an all-hands meeting in the conference room to watch a video message from her. It basically said, changes are coming. You're going to work very hard. Either get on board or get out. Probably not the best message when a third of your remaining workforce is within 5 years of retirement. The next week the legislature released the results of their own investigation, which basically spent 60 pages taking her to task for gross incompetence. She then sent out an email to all staff basically saying, I know the results of the legislature's investigation were distressing. Together we'll get through this. Now beach. We threw a party when we saw it. She was fired about a month later. I was having a disagreement over pay one day as a 19-year-old. Called into the office with the 3 company owners. Small family business. I said I was getting underpaid according to the government minimums. When questioned how I found this info, I said that my mum helped me find it. They called me a mama's boy and said my mum doesn't work here and I need to be an adult on my own. You're not getting a pay rise. Then one of 3 owners, all brothers, said to me, if you don't like it, you can leave. I stood up and said, well, open the door. Then some confused faces and looking at each other. I said again, open the door, Barry. I'll walk right out of it. Much backpedaling ensued with lots of oh no we weren't serious etc. One of the guys I worked with that week dropped me at the Air Force Recruitment Center later that week, where I applied and was accepted within a few months. Bosses found out and all 3 called me into the office again. They were asking why, and they said, remember 3 months ago when Barry told me if I don't like it to leave? Well, I don't like it. Okay, so my story went up kinda backwards. I was in school my last year. Since I was very little, I learned that I can understand better if I draw in my notes, so I draw more than what I write in notes. One class I was quiet, as always, drawing in my notebook while listening to one very boring teacher's class. He seemed to hate me because I was not very interested in the class and would draw or play or something while I was at it. He stopped talking, approached me and told me that what I was doing was not permitted and that I was not paying attention. As I looked up at him without shame or anything, he asked me to repeat what he was saying. I did, in a very condescending tone I loved as a teen. I hated him back. He then got very upset because I could do 2 things at once. Told me that if I didn't leave his class, he would. More than half an hour to the end of the class. I then closed my notebook and stared at him dead in the eye. After a very long pause I said, I'm not leaving. I have the right to stay. He was astonished. A little more silence, and then he left the classroom without a word. To this day I stand on my feet. I had a right to stay. I was not a problem kid. In fact, had one of the best grades of my course. I was not distracting anyone or distracted myself. He tried to get me in trouble, but I was friends with people in high places, aka the principal, and told them the whole version. He then proceeded to make my life impossible for the rest of the year, but boy did I enjoy the challenge. Almost didn't graduate high school because of him lol. He didn't like it. So he left. Haha PS. Sorry if there are any mistakes. English is not my first language. This is like a million years ago when I was in high school and dirt was a newly invented thing. I was on the gymnastics team for the school. Our team was an exceptionally talented team. Our coach was on the Olympics team about a decade before and was on the coaching team for the women's Olympic team that year. He was a very strict and disciplined coach, which was why our team was the top team in a 5-state area. Most of our team had scholarships to universities. Our school raked in a lot of money due to tax revenue from the company in our tax area being the leading employer in our state, so we had a lot of perks that other schools didn't. One of those perks was skydiving. So, being a bunch of rambunctious teenage athletes, a bunch of team members signed up and went out and learned to skydive. They spent a weekend jumping. The following Monday, the coach found out about this and during practice, started yelling at the whole team. He absolutely forbade anyone on the team from taking on such high-risk activities because injuries would diminish the team. One of the guys protested, so coach laid down the law. It's my way or you're off the team. Every guy that had gone skydiving got up in unison and walked out, cutting our team in half. We were still the dominant team, but boy, what a dramatic event that was. Finally, a post I can contribute to. Back in high school I went to a number of schools for at-risk / emotionally disturbed / violent / etc youth. I got expelled from 2 of them, but I'm talking about the last one I was in. Every Friday we had an extra art class, and it was the highlight of our week, since the art teacher was very cool, and it was the sole place where we felt like we didn't have to put on a show of how tough and bad we were. We were all able to be a bit more emotional vulnerable, stuff that we weren't normally. Except for one Friday, during our art time our teacher held us back and said that instead we were going to watch a movie instead. Coach Carter, to be exact. Suffice to say, no one was happy. It already sucks being a teen at those schools, because you're always condescended and looked down upon without having to do these dumb unity projects they force onto you, or bonding and teamwork classes or just watching Coach Carter for the nth time. Like we are already talked down to all the time, and have to follow these behavior hierarchies, where we get points, or lose points, and are awarded / punished, by giving and withholding food. And every time a movie is put on it's always the same thing. Someone new coaches the sports team that's full of at-risk kids or kids from the inner city, or whatever. Kids rebel under new authority that uses tough love to whip them into shape. Kids slowly change and learn to like the new coach and gain discipline and a larger sense of belonging yada yada. One kid has a drug overdose, or a shot or something tragic. The kids and the coach disband until one final game makes them decide to compete again, in which they either win triumphantly or lose, but are still okay, because the real prize was the journey they made along the way. We watched some of these so much we could literally quote them. They tried to get us to settle down, but everyone was still very pissed we were missing our art for it, and we ended up majorly protesting, and in general causing a sheeton of obstruction, to which the teacher finally told anyone who wanted to get credit for the class and do the work to stay, and everyone else to leave and go into a different classroom if we were going to be disruptive or upset. I'm not faking kidding when I say everyone left their classroom, me included. We spent the rest of the class time in a different room chatting and drawing things. They learned there's no faking with our art that day. Yes, during a lesson at a grande école I was in, one teacher / course was very bad, awful, barely understandable English, not his mother tongue. He didn't know the field he taught. He was rather mean. He had next to no teaching skills. If I remember correctly, he was often late or / and left the classroom for extended periods of time, think 40 minutes to 1h, for no reason, saying he was going to come back soon. Needless to say, students, we were around 30, were talking amongst themselves and being quite disrespectful. One time, he finally snapped, saying something along the line of, "If you don't like it, leave. I don't have time for you if you're not interested." A good 20 students left. Next class with him, I shit you not, the only one to come to his course. He came in the classroom 30 minutes late, looked at me, asked me if I was the only one there, and I said yes. He left saying he was going to be back soon. 2h30 later he comes back. Basically it was the end of the class, and he told me alright thank you for coming, you can go now. I had a job that mucked me over contract details and hours for months. The contract was 3 different contracts pieced together, some bits from the 90s referencing a site that had been bulldozed years ago, another part referenced my place of work as a site halfway across the country. It was a mess. My direct superior was the owner's kid, who drove a different expensive car into work every day, fond of his own voice, you know the type. Promised to fix all the contract issues, never did. I sent an email out copying in my supervisors, owner's kid and owner asking when I'm getting a corrected contract, and got bullshit excuses in response. I did find out privately that some of my supervisors were surprised my contract was so obviously last minute garbage. They wanted me to work weird hours throughout the week, and then on my first day, added that they wanted me to work a Sunday shift which wasn't in either the contract or job advert. I tentatively agreed, but wasn't keen on it as they wanted me alone covering the whole site. After a long back and forth I'd had enough, and asked for a meeting with owner's kid. That Friday we sat down, and I laid out my frustration with the hours and contract, and got told a final, if you don't like it, then leave, so I took him up on it. He wasn't expecting that, and had to come in on the Sunday to cover my shift. He then tried to say that, because I never signed the contract, that I wasn't going to get paid for my last month of work. Got that little threat stamped out pretty quick and the money in my bank soon after. I've swung past the site a few times since, and it closed very shortly after I left. Turns out me leaving caused the supervisors to ask after their own contract issues, and got owner himself involved. Owner's kid got very frustrated, and cussed them out in a conference call, prompting multiple petty revenge incidents and finally the shutting of the site, when they couldn't get a replacement or someone to take over my duties. Company operates it as a storage site now. Owner's kid is no longer listed on the website, but I don't know what's up with that. Got a couple cases actually, at least that I can remember. This one may not quite fit, but once at school, I can't remember what was said, but I had an extremely rude teacher who was getting beachy at me for no good reason. So, I interrupted her BS, and told her that I was collecting my stuff to spend the period in the principal's office due to her arrogance. And, as I left, I told her she may wanna call him to let him know I'm on my way. Let's just say she quit her sheet with me afterwards, lol. And, one that's probably more relevant, I work at a grocery store, late afternoon/night shift, and I tend to do most, if not all of the stuff we are supposed to do early. By the way, I mean I do all the stuff that needs to get done, not just my stuff. So we eventually end up with nothing to do, and the supervisors tend to get on our cases saying that if we don't find something to do, or as they say look/pretend to be busy, they'll find us something to do. For most of my coworkers, this works, but for me, I always reply with something along the lines of gladly. It beats either just sitting there or constantly wiping down the same belt over and over, slowly losing what little sanity I have left. They were definitely surprised at first, but they've just accepted how I'm now at it. Sorry about the essay, hope it wasn't too horrible to read through, lol. I did it once, in high school. I hated the math professor. She was the kind of person who acted tough all the time, but you could see that the main reason for that was that she was really insecure of herself. Also, while I was a fairly good student, I always failed math, to the point that in the last few years I just stopped trying and began to focus on the other subjects. When the school year finished, if you failed you had to do an exam containing all that was taught during the year, so I basically just skipped every exam and went straight to that. So, in the middle of a class, I think she kinda snapped and got really nervous for no apparent reason. The class was silent and doing their assigned work, and she began to say, well, anyone who's not interested in this class can leave. At first nobody did anything, but she repeated it 2 or 3 times. So I walked out. I walked around the school for a few minutes until the principal, the vice principal and the teacher caught me. I mean, I wasn't really going anywhere, and the school was not that big, so I didn't have many places to go. I was sanctioned, and I had to apologize, but it felt good anyway. The crazy thing was that for a few days later, every time I was going home from school and I crossed paths with students from other schools in my town, they were like, "Hey, you're the one who escaped from the classroom." And I was like, yeah, I guess. Okay, so it isn't my story, but my brother's. He was in second year high school when it happened. In that grade, having a 60% attendance at least is necessary for going to the next grade, and you need to take 4 or more subjects out of the 12, and there is the 8 hours, so there is like a lot of time that they don't have class, so they chill in at sitting place near between the cafeteria and the basketball court, and I need to specify that that school is from kindergarten to high school. 3-year-olds to 17-year-olds study there. So once when they were in class, the Arabic supervisor showed up to scold them about how they don't care much about school, and another supervisor showed up. We have like 7 in total, yes, big school, since the class was in her way, and joined on the scold and said, and I quote, "If you don't care, don't show up to class." Next day they had the same class and they all skipped and had an epic basketball match I got to watch. Since we had free and were allowed to go outside, the supervisor sure started to scold way less classes, and never to my brother's class until he graduated. In 7th grade we had this English teacher everybody disliked so much. Classmates hated the way he taught and even said he's a pervert. I was, a classic nerd and didn't care much except good grades, so I didn't participate in their gossip and stuff. One day there was a group reporting. The teacher commented on the presenter's work, and one student from the same group answered back. In my country that's offensive as hell, and my teacher got fuming mad. He told the class, "If you hate this class then get out." As expected, everyone got up from their seats and left. Even because I'm pressured by my classmates turning their hate energy on me. Few minutes later, the teacher came to where we stacked, and he started selectively tapping some students' shoulder, including mine, and said, "You go back inside." I would say I was with a few other decent students that got back in the room and proceeded calmly with the class. To this day I feel guilty of standing up and leaving as well. Teacher was not the best, but that was outright insulting and disrespectful. I'm happy he gave me the chance though.